In this video, I have Daniel Rusteen from OptimizeMyAirbnb.com. In this video, you'll learn his top tips for Airbnb hosts and how to make money with Airbnb. Listen to the end to hear his suggested apps and services that he uses to set up and automate his Airbnb business. And if you think this business model is for you, make sure to grab the tips and tricks for Airbnb hosts starter guide in the description below. Today I'm joined by Daniel Rusteen. Welcome, Danny.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about what you do. What's your background?
My background is I'm a CPA. I'm an accountant. That's my background. And that's how I came to Airbnb. My roommate told me about this company called Airbnb in January 2012 in the kitchen in San Francisco. And at the time, I was an accountant for a different company, and I decided to apply. For me, it clicked. Oh, that's a good idea. It clicked as a guest at the time. And so I applied, eventually got the job at Airbnb as an accountant. And then through that, realized that I love the company. I love the team, but I still don't like accounting. So through that, I started working at a local Airbnb property management company, and then I started my own. And then I realized by doing that, if I tweak these things, I can make these hosts more money, and I can make myself more money. That's what eventually created, a year later, Optimize My Airbnb. Well, it started Analyze My Airbnb, and now it's Optimize, and so it keeps growing and changing, and it's been a good time. I'm here, and it's a company that allows me to now be a guest. So now what I do is not only am I a host, I manage personally 5 properties around the globe, but now I'm a guest. So I'm in Mexico City now. I travel and I stay on Airbnb usually for 30 days or so to get to know a city.
That's awesome. So you have a very well-rounded experience with the whole world of Airbnb. You work there, you work at management companies, you manage Airbnbs, you're also a host. So for someone out there that wants to get started for the first time, I'm assuming the initial step is to think about renting out the property that you own already, a house or home or something like that. What is the first step? Like, what do you recommend for someone out there that wants to look into generating some income from property that they own?
The very first step is to figure out if you have space or not. It's not a house. You don't need a house to rent on Airbnb. I rented out my couch in San Francisco. It was phenomenal. I had 3 roommates. We paid for all of our twice-a-week cleanings, our utilities. We went out to family dinners. We got toilet paper, all the consumables. So it doesn't have to be a house. And a lot of people can make it work. And it's a lot less work than you think. The main thing, though, that people have to think about is, do they have the extra time? Do they have the couple hours a week to prepare for the guest, communicate with the guest?
That's a great point, that you don't have to actually own, you don't have to have a house that you're renting out. You can rent out anything. For someone that's just getting started, then if they decide, okay, I have the time, I have the space, what are the first steps towards creating a profile, a listing? Like you have 0 kind of credentials at the very beginning. How do you begin to build that kind of trust to get someone to rent space from you?
Airbnb is specifically in the business to get more hosts and guests, so they make that process easy. So if you don't even have an Airbnb account yet, you can actually search online for coupon codes, and they'll even get you 30, 40, 50 bucks off. And you'll click top right corner, log in or create account. It's very quick. You can do it with Facebook, though I don't recommend with Facebook, because if you grow with Airbnb and you start connecting the tools, it gives you problems connecting with Facebook. So use your email, and then you can even create a listing. It's easier than people think. It's not going to go live. You don't even have to have a space. You could just go through the process. What does it look like? How many beds do I have? What's my address? You could take 30 minutes, sign up for an account, create a listing, add pictures, and figure out the whole back end.
What are the startup costs? I think you mentioned a little bit about the discount codes that might be available. Like, how much budget are we talking about someone needs to set aside if they are good on this route?
A lot of people kind of default, I want the luxury experience, I want the 5-star experience, I want the best, which is great, but you don't have to do that. You can go the budget route. But so if you're going the budget route and you already have furniture and everything, then the startup costs is mostly your time. You're going to want to get extra guest utilities, extra guest consumables, an extra towel, a couple extra pillowcases. But if you have a whole house and you want to really go out, you could even hire an interior designer. It costs $5,000 to really make the place look good, which it is worth it if that's in your budget right away. Pictures that pop and make people warm inside when they're looking at them.
If someone is evaluating whether they have like the space or the right kind of property, are there common reasons why someone is not a good option for Airbnb?
In some markets, it probably is better to rent out long long-term. A lot of people also like that consistency, one check coming in all the time. It's kind of an old school mindset. A lot of people I hear that don't do Airbnb, they say, oh, I want a consistent paycheck. I don't want the month to month variances. Well, actually there are variances, but they're all way above what you would make. Some people, they're very risk averse, so they would rather make less consistently rather than way more always. There are high and low seasons, and you have to book out. But if you're in a super residential area that's not next to any business or anything, then you just have to set your expectations. You rent it out here and there, but then you have it for your family and friends or yourself, or if you don't want to remain. Yeah, so that's the biggest thing. You got to set your expectations. Some people are going to make a lot more than others.
Got it. That makes sense. So you decide to rent out your property, rent out a room, rent out something that you own. What are the first steps towards creating a listing that hit checks like the boxes? Like, what are some key aspects of having a good Airbnb listing?
Okay, step number 1, take good photos. You want a professional photographer, that's ideal. But with phones nowadays, if you have any phone in the last 5 years, the newer phones, they incrementally improve the camera. You got to take good photos, and you got to take at least one photo of every space available to the guests. I see all the time in the description, which guests don't read. In the description, it says, we have a balcony. And then I'm looking in the photos and I don't see a balcony. And most people look in the photos and they don't read the text. So they would miss that sellable feature. So the first point is to take photos. That's like 80% of your work. If you take good photos, and I have articles on my website on how to take good photos and specific tips on photo layout and photo captions. There's also a website, Overlooked to Overbooked, and they teach you how to take the best photos with your camera phone. It's a pretty unique website. I took the course. So that's number 1, take good photos. And then what you want to do is you want to start being different. So what the normal host does is they'll create a generic title, spacious, airy, wonderful room in the heart of San Francisco. That's just a bunch of words that blend in with thousands of listings. And I mentioned title because when you search on Airbnb, you have that big map and you have the big photo, and then you have the title. So the photo and the title are the first things after the location, which is out of your control. You're not going to change your location. Those are the biggest 2 things. So what I do is, and I have, again, a blog article about this, I'll add a little symbol into the title. Like, instead of heart of San Francisco spelled out, I'll throw in like a red heart at the beginning, because on mobile and smaller devices, the end of the title is cut off. It's attracting more eyes. And Airbnb, just like Google, it's a search system. Airbnb follows the user all the way to the end. Whereas Google, after they click the website, I don't think Google tracks so much, but Airbnb can track how long you stayed there. Did you stay at that? Did you book that listing? And afterwards, did you give it a 5-star review? And the other thing is, as a host, you make Airbnb money, whereas a website doesn't necessarily directly make Google money. You want to make Airbnb as much money as you can. That means accept people, get more clicks and views on your listing.
How they rank listings, like what are some ways to optimize so that you appear, on the top of the search results when a guest is searching for a place to stay?
The first thing is, as hosts, there's tools out there that they tell you your rank in search, but unlike Google, where it's static, Airbnb, it's dynamic. I just mentioned just a second ago, when you're a guest, Airbnb sees which listings you looked at, which ones you booked, and if you ultimately left a good review. They use all that information to give you a more personalized search, and that increases every day. Just a tip, if there's hosts who are already there, a lot of them, they love these tools, and they're useful to a point, but just know that that's just one search.
Speaking of the review, what do you find that guests care about? Like, what are some key things that you have to hit on as a host to get that 5-star review?
It's a lot about setting the guest expectations in line with what you deliver, or even slightly lower and deliver something better. A common example of the opposite, where they set their expectations high and it's lower, is they take the best photos ever. They do wide angle, they make it seem bigger, and then the guest gets there and they're like, oh, this is worse than I expected. Or they'll change the location on the map. They'll move it slightly closer to the downtown area or the central district. The average stay on Airbnb is 3.5 days. So if you're a host, check-in is a big one. A lot of hosts get this wrong. 80% of hosts, in my experience, get this wrong. They make the guest wait. Even if you get this wrong, though, keep in mind, as a host, you have 3 days to make up for it. And as time passes, the guest forgets, oh, that was the worst check-in ever. So what you really want to get right is also the checkout and the very end of the stay. That's more important than the beginning. Although they're all important, but the more, if you had to focus on one, get the checkout and everything right, which is easier than the check-in, especially if you mess up.
What makes a good check-in and a good checkout process?
It's easier than you think, but people have so much going on in their personal lives, they don't just sit back and think about it. What I do is I'll send out at 5 p.m. the day before checkout. I'll remind them the time of checkout, because even though you're a host and you know, oh, my checkout's always 11, you know that, but the guest doesn't know that. So I'll remind them what days checkout. I'll give them 2 or 3 of the most important checkout instructions. So I'll tell them where to leave the key if there's a key, what to do, any specific checkout instructions. If you're awesome, you can say when the best time is to travel to the airport. You can give them your Uber credit to say, hey, here's my Uber credit, or here's my Lyft credit for your airport. Drive them to the airport if you want. Because remember, when a guest travels, it's stressful. They're usually in the city for the new time. They got to do the airport. If you give them a tip about the airport, make that day as simple as possible, even after they leave.
Makes sense. So if, let's say you're a beginner and you miss out on a lot of these things and you end up with a bad review, how do you address that moving forward? Is there anything you can do about that particular bad rating or bad review?
Yes, there is. So what you don't do is create a new account. A bad review is bad. It's actually horrible because on Airbnb's made it where everyone just gives 5 stars. You're either going to get a 5-star or a 1-star. No one gives 2, 3, 4 stars. On Airbnb, if you have 4.5 stars, it's like on Uber, they kick you off if you have like a 4.8. So on Airbnb, it's the same. If you see even a 4.5, that's like a failing listing. I've only seen a handful of 4 stars. So if you get a bad review, it's okay. What you can do is, number one, learn from that experience. If this is a long-term thing for you, one bad review is not going to kill you. It'll hurt you in the short term, but not the long term. You'll want to respond to the review. If the internet is slow, for example, in my Airbnb right now, it's slow. So if I left that as a review, if that was a huge point for me and I was like, I would never stay here again, the internet was terrible. If I was a host, in this specific case, I would address that very, very quickly and say, hey, I've upgraded the speed. And so usually the negative reviews are really long, and then hosts respond even longer. I actually did this myself in my early days. I had a negative review. She said my room smelled, and it smelled so bad she left. And she left a part negative, part positive review. And so I didn't respond to any reviews, but I responded to this one. And all that does is it just draws attention to that review. My advice is to respond to all reviews. So when you have a negative review, it won't call extra attention to it, but also address the negative part of the review briefly as possible.
Yeah, I also think that those negative reviews give you the opportunity to demonstrate that you are a responsive and responsible host that's going to fix problems if they come up during that stay. So yeah, I totally agree with you on making sure you do respond and using that as that opportunity. So what are some of the bang for your bucks in terms of amenities that you might want to add to the Airbnb that you are hosting? Like, what are some of the biggest benefits that you've seen from people that have added to their property?
The easiest that anyone can do is get a Netflix subscription. Some credit cards even pay for, if you have a subscription recurring, so they'll even pay for it. So it doesn't cost anything. But even if it does, I think it's like $12 a month. Another one is a Bluetooth player. This, for me, has been hugely successful. It got stolen one time. 1 in 100 guests are going to break or steal something. It's like a $20 thing, so I just buy a new one. And I didn't know it was as used as it was, and I have it on the listing, Bluetooth, wireless Bluetooth. And a few guests asked me, they're like, hey, where's the Bluetooth? I bought a new one. It's $20 on Amazon. That's a huge one as well that you can do, low cost.
Yeah, so you're involved in different, or you have been involved, or you're currently involved in different parts of the, I guess, Airbnb universe in terms of ways that you can generate income from there. Can you rent out property that you don't own? Like, how can you participate in this ecosystem if you don't actually own any property?
You can. There's a lot of people who do this. I've never done it, but there's a lot of people who get on the lease. They'll be transparent with the landlord and say, hey, this is going to rent out for $1,200 a month. I'm going to make anywhere from $1,500 to $2,800 depending on the month. I'm going to short-term rent it out. So what I'll pay you is $1,350. So I'll pay you a bit above market. I'll manage it and everything. And people have really detailed strategies on this. Like, a common misconception is it's going to get more dirty, the house. But there's going to be more wear and tear. But actually it's false, because when people are on vacation, they're out of the house more than someone who lives there. And it gets cleaned 2-3 times a week. You'll have to explain that to the landlord. That's one big issue with the landlord. So it's very doable. They do it in all the cities. The downside of that is you do have a 12, 24. That's another thing. If a landlord doesn't want to do it, you can say, hey, I'll guarantee you 24 months of payment. So the downside is you're on the hook for 24 months of payment. So I would research a bit more, go to my blog, read a couple of the articles, see how you can maximize the guest experience, maximize your income before you go that route. But it's a very doable route. I know many people who have do it. They've even created conferences on how to do this specific thing.
That's great that there is room for that for people that don't have the capital to buy property and rent it out. And you mentioned one of the reasons why a landlord might not be interested in taking this approach. Are there any other reasons that you can think of that someone should keep in mind before they go down this approach of renting out, starting a lease on a property and then renting it out on Airbnb?
Yeah, another big concern is liability. If you're my tenant, I know you're there and you're my responsibility, but now if you're renting it out to other people, what if they trip and fall? And there's nowadays a bunch of short-term rental and vacation rental insurance for damage, for injury. Airbnb also has one, but I recommend get your own. It's easily doable. It's very cheap as well. I have on my website, I have a partner section, which is companies mostly specifically worked with. Some of them know the co-founder and research the company a bit. And there's one on there for vacation rental insurance.
Now, let's say that you do own the property. You rent out Airbnbs when you're not near a location where you can't be checking in on it on a weekly basis, when you're you're in a completely different city or state.
The term is hosted or unhosted. So if you're hosting, you live there, or you're in the area, you're going to welcome the guests, you're going to answer questions, etc. You could also get a property manager. And in my book, I have a chapter. I think it's the most powerful chapter because, for example, if you want to pay a property manager, for your listeners who have a property, might not want to spend the time managing it, you can pay a property manager 15 to 25%. Or what you could do is, it requires a bit of work up front, but you can automate a bunch of things. Automate the check-in. You will need to get some sort of a local contact there who can respond around the clock. It's not as hard as it sounds. The main thing is they need to be responsible. I do this. I do the strategy that I lay out in the book, and I manage 5 properties all remotely. Some of them I haven't even seen in person, but I have this process implemented, and it takes me about maybe an hour per 3 or 4 listings after this process is set up. And I have everything connected where if there's an issue, I tell the guest, call this. If it's an emergency issue, if it's not, you can reach out to me. The check-in is all automated. I send the cleaners an automated email. Hey, you got to clean this day, etc. So it is possible, but keep in mind, if you do that, you still do have to do some customer service. And a lot of people are like, they hear customer service and like, ooh. So if you hate customer service, then think about hiring a property management company.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you could go the route of having some kind of local contact. Is that the property management company, or is this a different type of role that you can look to outsource?
It could be. If you want to hire a property management company, they will undoubtedly have a local contact. If you want to do it yourself, you need to find a local contact yourself. You can post on the Airbnb community boards. It's not ideal, but you can even reach out to a host near you and say, hey, you have extra bandwidth to help me. There's Facebook groups in your neighborhood, especially if you're in a big city, to find someone who's familiar with Airbnb and who has the time to do this.
Okay, so the 15 and 20, I think 25% that you said for the property management, what are some other common or possibly common costs that are involved with operating a business like this?
The biggest one is going to be consumables. So some hosts make the election not to provide consumables unless you're bottom of the barrel, super budget for backpackers listing. Provide consumables. They're not that expensive. Soaps, paper towels. There's like 12 standard consumables that you want. Garbage bags is a big one. A lot of hosts don't provide that. The other expense is going to be linens. Hosts don't think about this. You do want to change out your linens at a more frequent pace than you do for yourself. And it's not even that frequent, once a year. The third cost is going to be unexpected. So a guest is going to get sick and throw up in your bed. A guest is going to accidentally break a bunch of cookware. A guest is going to steal something. Those are the 3 biggest costs.
What about pricing? How do you determine how much you should price your Airbnb for?
This we could do a whole episode on. There's just a lot of nuances. The easiest way to do it, and the least efficient, is to just put one price for your calendar and that's it. Don't worry about it. Or you can connect to Airbnb Smart Pricing, which is notorious and just known in the Airbnb community. They lower your prices because Airbnb wants more nights. They're not in the business of maximizing the host's income. They're in the business of more nights. But you can connect to third-party pricing tools. Price Labs is the one that I use and recommend. And they'll fluctuate your daily prices, and they'll do it twice a day based on day of the week, the season, local events, hotel prices. So you can just stop there if you want. But on a layer above that, once you get to the advanced level, and again, all this, I have blog posts on my website. I change my price based on occupancy. I know that in my market, in New York, for example, the average guest books about 21, 25 days in advance. Depends a little bit on the season. So that means that 50% of my bookings come before 21 days and 50% come after 21 days. So that means I want about 50% occupancy within 21 days. So if I drop below that, I'll lower my price. If I dip above that, I'll higher my price. It's as simple as that.
And is there like a threshold that you look to hit in terms of occupancy rate?
Depends on the season and the market, but for me on high season, 100%. There's gonna be days that you don't get booked and you don't wanna lower your price to a ridiculous amount and get someone that books it, 1 day in advance and has a party there. It really depends on the market. I would say the lowest in any market, any realistic market, is an average of like 60, 70% a year. The Superhosts have an occupancy of around 85, 90% throughout the year. So busy months is basically 100%, slower months 70, 75, 80.
So you mentioned, I think, Price Labs. Are there any other tools or applications that you recommend that hosts use or that you use to help run the business?
This tool will set you apart from 99, if not more percent of hosts. I've been traveling on Airbnb for 5 years, and I've exclusively been traveling every day on Airbnb for 1 year. And I've never received this item that I'm about to tell you. It's called an electronic guidebook, and it's a single source that you create that the guests can consult if they want to, how to check in. Where's the best parking spot? Where's the grocery store? What are 2 or 3 bars around my area that you recommend? Restaurants, etc. Parks, tips about your house, how to work, how to get to Netflix, how to use the washer and dryer. This is super useful. No one has it. It costs, I think, like $7. The one that I use and recommend is Hostfully. And for a lot of these products that I'm recommending, I'm able to get a little bit of a discount for the folks. So it's on the partners page as well. So if you end up doing this, you go to my website, go to the partners page, and I have what kind of discount they have. And to take it a step further, after you create the electronic guidebook, what I do is I'll send it to the guest automatically. Smart B&B, which sends out automated messages. That takes out a ton of time. So I'll have an automated message sent out 4 days before check-in saying, hey, you're checking in 4 days. Here's a link to your guidebook. This guidebook has check-in information, where to park, etc. What I just mentioned to you. Be sure to have a look at it before you come. And on all of my properties, I'm a Superhost, so it does work.
Thanks for watching. Now the question for you is, would you Airbnb the place that you are living in right now? Leave your answer in the comments below. And again, if you think this business model is a good fit for you, make sure to grab the tips and tricks for Airbnb host starter guide in the description below. To learn more about side hustles, make sure to check out these other videos about other side hustles.